Being a kid in the year 2001 was, with one word, thrilling. We survived the Y2K bug that allegedly was going to corrupt computers worldwide and would usher the world in an age of chaos. Well, too bad, 19 years too early. GTA 3 for the PlayStation 2 was released, which relaunched a debate about violence in video games. And Jennifer Lopez entranced me with her songs and made my body rise in ways I didn't know it could. But there was even more going on than that, especially in the video game industry. No matter if video games were seen as a harmless pastime at best or a brainwashing device at worst, they were still seen as mostly brainless. Not fit to tell good stories, void of any educational or, for that matter, lasting value. But slowly and steadily, video games started to hijack the mainstream, and not just because of new hardware or a controversial debate. Behind the scenes, this relatively young medium started to mature. Writers and filmmakers turned their attention to video games, and with their knowledge they had and the new possibilities the medium offered, wonderful things happened. Immersive experiences like the ones in Metal Gear Solid and Final Fantasy VII were created, widely received, and are cherished to this day because they proved that video games were not as mindless as assumed. But of course, not every video game with a writer or filmmaker on board was bound to succeed. And that is because the experimentation phase had only just begun, and lots of game development studios didn't know how to integrate these new players into their team. Such was the case with Clive Barker's Undying, a horror game that had all the potential to become a big hit, but ultimately failed at releasing its full potential. It was developed by DreamWorks Entertainment under the supervision of Electronic Arts. DreamWorks, or as they're called today, Danger Close Games, just had their first big hit with Medal of Honor, a first-person shooter that was created in collaboration with Steven Spielberg. Look it up, it's true. And for the next project, DreamWorks wanted to create a horror game. So far, they created Goosebumps, Escape from Horrorland, and Goosebumps: Attack of the Mutant. And none of those games were even remotely scary. It's no surprise then that the first draft of the protagonist was an absolute power fantasy. You would play as Count Magnus, a magical bald warlock with tattoos all over his body. But come on, that is not scary. Does he look scared? Of course not, he looks like he's going to save a princess from a magical kingdom. That's not scary. Scary always erupts when you feel powerless, when you are overcome with odds you can't beat and much less comprehend. That is scary, but not this. So fortunately, somebody had the bright idea to bring Clive Barker in. For everyone who doesn't know who that is, he was one of the two undisputed powerhouses of horror in the 90s and early 2000s. And the other one was Stephen King. Barker's works bordered on the surreal. He mixed horror with fantasy and was not shy of using body horror and sexual topics in his writing, as he has proven multiple times not only in his writing but also in his paintings. So thank God he rejected the idea of Count Super Mario Mage and demanded the protagonist to be, and I quote, down to earth and also fabulously sexy. And boom! 1 week later we got Patrick Galloway, who in all honesty looks way better and way more normal than the Count. From here on out, Clive worked with the team and improved the story, the lore, and the settings, but still, the development team forgot one very basic rule. If one element changes, then all other elements have to be revised as well. And that's what they didn't do. Undying is a first-person survival horror game that takes place in 1923. Our main character is Patrick Galloway, a World War veteran turned paranormal investigator. He received an urgent letter from his old brother-in-arms Jeremiah, who finds himself under a curse that killed his entire family and left him as the only survivor. As Patrick arrives in the manor, it becomes quite apparent that Jeremiah's ravings about this curse are more than just superstition. Ghosts are flying through the hallways, strange sounds can be heard in the distance, and the house staff say they even saw the dead siblings roam around in and around the manor. Patrick, now rightfully fearing for his best friend's life and soul, tries to find a way to lift the curse before it claims the bedridden Jeremiah as well. And he does it the only way he knows how. While searching for the root of the curse, Patrick will have to face off against a multitude of enemies and solve light puzzles in the form of key finding or figuring out that this is in fact not a wall at all. So far, so FPS. I'd even say that this was pretty much the formula for the time. I mean, Wolfenstein did it, Doom did it, but maybe that is a topic for another video. Now, that doesn't mean that Undying is out of ideas. In fact, in some places it was quite innovative. One of those innovations are the little cinematic sequences between you and the house staff. Whenever you enter a new chapter of the story, you encounter a maid or a butler who gives you a little bit of exposition. And usually, they give you access to more areas while they're at it. So think of these encounters like a progression system that rewards you with some basic level of interaction. It's honestly lovely that the staff is still around, even though they get killed off one by the demon infestation. Another thing that blew me away is the magic system. Over the course of the game, Patrick can find magic spells which expand his arsenal and abilities. And it's pretty easy to use too. You shoot your weapon with the left mouse button, while you activate your spells with the right. The first spell you start the game with is Scry. By using this, Patrick is able to receive visions from the past and uncover some hidden truths. And it can also be used to find secrets and hidden passages. The game is even fair enough to tell you when you might need to use this spell. This is one of the features I really enjoyed because it brought some environmental storytelling to the universe of Undying. Subsequent spells are way less on the passive side though. For example, we have the Ectoplasm spell for offense, a shield spell for defense, a haste spell to run across the battlefield, and one of my personal favorites, the Invoke spell. With it, you can raise fallen enemies and let them fight for you, or use it in reverse and take some undead bastards out for good. But the best part is that you can upgrade your spells too. By finding certain stones called amplifiers, you are able to level up your spell of choice, often to devastating effects. The most effective spell in the game is the Skull Storm. It summons a fiery skull from the earth, which explodes on impact. It's like having unlimited dynamite sticks at your disposal. And I urge you to amplify that spell. How about 3 exploding skulls at once? And each of them comes with its own personality to boot. Oh my god, look at this, this is so cute! Okay, enough about magic. What about the weapons? Well, apart from your mandatory revolver and a shotgun, you can also find some outlandish weapons. A spear gun, a magical scythe to do melee damage, and a Tibetan war cannon, or as I like to call it, the most broken weapon in the game, because it doesn't need ammo. It also slows enemies when you hit them, and the damage output is fairly decent too. Nearly all the weapons you find have a secondary fire mode as well. The shotgun can be turned into a flamethrower, and the scythe can heal you for every kill you make. The best part about all this is you are free to experiment with different playstyles. For example, you can upgrade your magic shield and equip the shotgun in order to get very intimate with the unknown. And not so unknown. Hey baby, how are you doing? Yeah, did I mention that the game can be pretty gruesome? Every enemy has a unique kill animation and I love this little feature. Things like that make the game even scarier and give a little more personality to the monsters you fight. But I gotta admit, seeing Patrick die 100 times in a row is not that much fun. It's like eating your favorite meal. If it happens sometimes, it's a feast. If it happens all the time, it gets boring. I think I covered all the relevant game mechanics so far, so let's talk a bit about the atmosphere. This game is 19 years old by now, and just to get a good comparison going on, and because I'm a lazy bastard, I exhumed some reviews from the time it came out to see how well the game holds up today. So here we go, first quote. Undying has superb graphics, truly impressive sound effects, and fast-paced, enjoyable fighting sequences. I have to agree. The combat is fluent and fun. The monsters and NPCs, even though a little dated, still look nice. The game's lighting and shadow effects are what make Undying look so convincing. Yeah, about that, I don't think it holds up, like, at all. Maybe I am spoiled rotten, but even then I found this darkness to be more annoying at best because you can still see the enemies without any problems. The only thing the shadows and dark corridors did was making it harder to navigate through the levels. In general, the scenery in Undying looks so good that you'll enjoy simply being in it and taking it in. No. I mean, to be completely fair, the atmosphere has its genuine moments of breathtaking awe, but they are far and few in between. Open spaces, for example, look completely empty. There is nothing interesting to look at. All in all, I would say the design is okay, but nothing to write home about. He moves fast. Hell yeah, he does! That's one of the side effects when you graduate from the Ministry of Silly Walks. The walking animation is so stupid I had way too much fun fiddling around with mirrors and see Patrick spaz out like an Adderall puppet that came to life and didn't know how to walk. And even though the game features an intriguing story and puts a nice spin on the tried and true shooting formula, it is not without its flaws. Let's start with the minor issues. The key bindings are all over the place. In today's day and age, we figured out a shooter template for our keyboards. Usually R is for reload, C or X is for crouch, and so on and on. But because this game was made in the early 2000s where these unspoken rules didn't exist, you need to reload with the tab key. But because we were still experimenting around with good key bindings, stuff like that is excusable. It's also excusable that the game doesn't have a map and at times a very confusing level design. You will be forced to backtrack a lot because you will get keys to rooms you previously didn't have access to, and I think the most visited place in the whole game was the kitchen because you need to get out of the backyard at one point, then you go back through the kitchen into a room you found the key for, then you need to get out again to find your way to a lighthouse nearby, and the game tries to lead you into the right directions by using the old-timey strategy of just locking doors.
Won't budge. Jammed. Stuck.
There are things that I cannot excuse though. In fact, it is time to talk about the part where the game develops a Jekyll-Hyde complex. Almost all of the game's problems stem from the fact that it cannot decide whether it wants to be an action game or a horror game. For example, while exploring the manor, you can find notes, books, and journals which will reveal a lot about the backstory of Jeremiah's family, the curse, how they invoked it, and how it affected each of the siblings. And these journals are very interesting to read through. But you have to stop, sit your ass down, and actually read a lot of text. It puts a hard stop to the atmosphere you have going on, which of course countless other horror games did too, but they did it better. Let's take one of the good Resident Evil games as an example. You move slowly, you don't know what's around the next corner, but you're also not overrun by enemies all the time. Sure, sometimes you have to decide quickly, but those moments are rare. In Resident Evil, the horror comes from the suspense. It seeps into your psyche. In Undying, the movement is fast, the fights are hectic, there are enemies everywhere, you have to keep the adrenaline going because everything's coming at breakneck speed. Undying's horror comes from a place of mystery, sure, but also it comes from pure stress. Resident Evil, on the other hand, seamlessly integrates those quiet moments into the game. It gives you time to breathe. Here, it might even be plausible for the character to sit down and read a note. But with all the stuff that is going on in Undying, not so much. You could, of course, just ignore the lore and the stories, but then you wouldn't know how to kill the bosses. Because one of those books explicitly states that you need a certain scythe to take the siblings on. Every other weapon is useless. So when the game came out, reading was mandatory. Today you can just go to the internet, look it up, but I can only assume that a lot of people gave up on the first boss because they didn't know how to kill it. Or didn't have the patience to read. Or didn't know how to read at all. The point is, this is bad game design. Vital information should never be in an optional place like the lore section, and that's where they put it. And by vital information, I also mean the stuff you need to know to understand what the hell is going on and why you are going to certain places. If you didn't read the journals, then you won't understand why there is a door in the mansion which leads to a nightmare dimension, which is colonized by mini Cthulhus, by the way. You will also not understand why we are traveling back in time to steal the scythe of the Celts from an order of blood-crazed monks. You will just go there at some point and shake your head about those weird ideas. This identity crisis is also evident in the general game design. Undying gradually shifts its focus from horror and getting chased through the hallways like a scared kitten to a generic action fantasy. At the end of the game, you will be a walking arsenal of badassery, which in and of itself is fine, but it saps all the anxiety and tension out of the game. Otherworldly beings, as wonderfully grotesque as they might look, are turned into just another stepping stone for you to blow up. I hope you see where I'm going with this. Undying is by all means not a bad game, but it resembles more a diamond in the rough. For one, the action parts are awesome and thrilling, especially the magic system gives you a lot to experiment with, but for a horror game there's too much action and not enough suspension and tension to make the monsters really scary. And concerning the horror side, the writing is good. I read through all the journals and I enjoyed the backstory very much. But the thing is, the real scary part lies in the journals and books you find, and as we already know, reading in this game is almost completely optional. Undying is a story about domestic abuse, patricide, and dark impulses being unchecked. But because this feels like a separate part from the game, it can be skipped and you wouldn't even know it. There was an opportunity here to fuse the story part and the gameplay part together, but with the exception of one single character, that opportunity was not taken. Seriously, Aaron the Ghost is one of the highlights of the game, and he alone is a wonderful lesson in how to set up an antagonist. That's why I'm saying it's a shame that Clive Barker was not utilized as he could have been. With a little more story integration, this could have been an all-time classic, but unfortunately it just falls short of that status and instead got filed under nice FPS game with horror elements. DreamWorks even planned a sequel, but the first game didn't sell very well, so the whole project got canned after this one story. Okay, so final word. If you look for old school games, this is definitely for you. Undying is also a must-play for everyone who wants to go into game design. It had all the potential to create something truly wonderful. They had the manpower, the experience, one of the best horror writers of the decade, but failed to mix it all into a coherent experience.